Hey everybody, it's Mr. G. Welcome to this episode of Just Corvette Crazy. Today we're going to be working on the 2002 Z06. It's time for a battery change. So the battery that's been in here has been 6 years, so we're going to pull it out, put a new one in. While I have the battery out, I'm going to be doing a couple of other things. I'm going to be installing the quick release for my battery maintainer, as well as cleaning up the main battery ground. Corvettes especially are notorious for having grounding issues. I'm going to take you in the classroom and I'm going to show you why that is, and hopefully you might learn something today. Stay tuned. Hey folks, this is Mr. G and welcome to Just Corvette Crazy. On this channel we talk about Corvettes, we fix some Corvettes, and we love to drive our Corvettes. So if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out a lot. Thanks. Hey, welcome to Mr. G's classroom. So today we're going to talk a little bit about grounds, what they are, and why we have problems with them in the Corvette. So, a little bit of electronic background. So we have a battery. From the positive side of the battery, goes off to our fuse panel. From the fuse panel to switches, something like the taillights, and then the circuit must return to the negative side of the battery. So electricity must flow in a loop. So it must leave the positive. We're talking about what's known as conventional current flow. It flows from the positive to the negative. So we have one circuit. What if we had another circuit? So from our fuse panel, we have another fuse, we have another switch, and now we have, let's say, our headlights. And then back to the battery. What if we had another circuit? From the fuse panel to a fuse, switch. So now we're going to go to the backup lights and return. So if all of these circuits were located in the same part of the car, you'll notice that all of these lines here, the purple one, the green one, and the red one, all return to the same place. So why can't we just do something like this? Get rid of those three different lines and make one line back to the battery. And then we have each of those individuals go off to meet that one return line. We're cutting down on the wiring. So the idea is we can have a number of circuits all leaving the fuse panel. As long as they're going to the same area of the car, we could utilize one return line. That's the concept. Now, what is a conductor? Well, here we have copper wires. A conductor is a material that, under normal condition, conducts electricity very easily. Normally they are metals. So copper, steel, aluminum. So why not, instead of having a wire return to the battery from every part of the car, why don't we just get rid of that wire altogether and use the metal chassis of the car to return the electricity back to the battery. So that's when we end up with what's known as a ground. The symbol looks like this. Anytime you see two symbols that match, that means that those points are connected. So, we have electricity leaving the battery, going through our different circuits, joining at one point at the end of that harness, and getting connected to the chassis. So the metal chassis of the, in our case for Corvettes, the aluminum chassis. The electricity flows through the chassis to this connector and then returns to the battery. So let's say now we have from our fuse panel, got another fuse, and we have a switch, and let's say that's going off to the headlights of the car. And then we have another one that's coming off, going through another fuse. And let's say this is the front running lights of the car. So, this is at the back of the car. This is another part of the wiring harness that goes to the front of the car. So what we're going to do is we are going to take those and connect them to the same point and then connect it to the chassis. And again, electricity will make its way back to the battery through the chassis of the car. So this is what we refer to as grounding. So just as an example, in the C5 Corvette, there are 9 different grounding points in your car. So basically, each area of the car has its own ground. So there's grounds at the back of the car, there's grounds at the front of the car. The one we're going to be looking at in this video when I get out to the car is ground point number 9, which is located right at the battery, and that's the main return to the battery. So, depending on what part of your car is experiencing gremlins, you can focus on that particular ground. So every circuit has 2 grounding points. One at the end of the wiring harness, 2 is the return back to the battery. So every circuit returns back to the battery. So that's why that connector that we're going to be cleaning today is a very, very important one, because that is one of the main returns back to your battery. Alright, so we've learned a little bit about what grounds are and how they work. Now we're going to talk about why we seem to have a problem with them in the Corvette. So in the Corvette, we have an aluminum chassis. Embedded into the aluminum chassis are these like a little bit of a riv nut type device that has a threaded bolt that comes out of it. That is our grounding connection. So what we do is we bring the wires in and over top of that bolt. You'll see it in the car once we get outside and start working. And we take another wire and bring it in and over top. And then what we do is we take a nut and we thread the nut down on top of the grounding connector. This is very common practice in automobiles. In a Corvette, this is where our problem starts. All of this is exposed to the elements, exposed to the air, moisture, any road grime, anything is exposed. in this area. It's not a sealed connection. What makes it worse is the aluminum has different reactions to the elements than the copper wires do. And you can develop types of oxidation on the connectors because of it. So what I like to do is when I take off the ground and clean everything up and put it all back together, I actually like to spray a little bit of a rust inhibitor on top of the connector after it's all put together, just to kind of lock out any of the excess moisture, any of the road grime, any of that kind of stuff that could get into that connector has to go through or around my rust inhibitor to get there first. So one of the reasons why we have grounding issues is because it is a mechanical connection, not a true electrical connection, like as if we were to solder them there. It's exposed to the elements, and we end up with oxidation, corrosion, heat expansion. These connectors become dirty, they become a little bit loose, and we end up with grounding issues. So it's very important that you take care of your grounds, clean them up, spray them, make sure that we have good connections, or you will have some electrical gremlins in your Corvette. Alright, so we're back out over the car. The first thing we need to do is remove the old battery. So 8mm, always remove the negative first. So on any negative grounded car, always remove the negative first. Reason why is if I was to put this on the positive side with the ground still connected and I slipped with the wrench and I touched something that is metal chassis grounded, I would create a short circuit across my battery. So it's not as much of a risk in a Corvette, because in a Corvette we've got fiberglass and we've got composite materials. But if I was in a regular car and my ground was connected and I actually pulled this over and I hit the metal frame like this, that would actually short circuit my battery, cause sparks, cause damage to the car. So you always remove the ground first, and when you are putting the new battery back, you always put the ground last. So we're just going to undo the cables. So now down in between, about the center of the battery, there is one bolt to remove that's holding the battery in place. So that bolt seems to be 14 mil. And basically that's what comes up. So that's the part that's holding the battery in. So we kind of make sure the cables are out of the way. The battery should be able to slide up and out. Okay, so the grounding point we want to get to is this one right here at the end of my pointer. Now it's actually covered by a piece of the plastic that goes around the battery compartment. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove one of these plastic rivets, and then we're going to move this plastic out of the way and get it over top of this grounding point and free up that grounding point. So that is one of the main grounding points for the car. It is the one that is the closest to the battery on the return side. So what that looks like is going to pop up this plastic rivet to free up this part here. And then what we're going to do is just get the plastic off of the grounding point. So it's 10 millimeter to remove that grounding connection. So like I said in the classroom, there are 9 grounds on the C5 Corvette. And this happens to be one of the main return grounds. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull off the leads that are 2, and there happens to be 3. What we want to do now is clean those leads up, clean up the area around where it's going to screw back down, install the new connector for our quick disconnect on the battery maintainer, and then reinstall everything. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that there's no residue or rust or corrosion on the contacts. So a little bit of sandpaper, wire brush, and just make sure that that connection is relatively clean. Same with these other ones you're going to be taking off. One, 2, and 3. And you can see that these have a little bit of a coating of oxidation on them. And then there's the grounding point itself. So you want to make sure that that's nice and clean, no dirt scraped off. And the same thing with the nut. So the bottom of the nut, just make sure it's nice and clean. So once you have them sanded off a little bit, get some electronic contact cleaner and give them a spray. Make sure you also get that grounding point, give it a spray. Alright, so everything is all cleaned up. We've got 3 connectors, plus we're going to be installing the quick release for our battery maintainer. So we'll just put these back into place. One, 2. I think I'm going to put the battery maintainer as number 3, and then the main battery ground as number 4, and then we're going to put the nut back in place. You don't want to go too tight where you're going to snap that ground. That'll put you in trouble, so be very careful. So now the grounds are in place. They're cleaned up. What I like to do is spray a little protectant on them. So what I have is a can of Rust Check, and this is a coat and protect. What I do is just a quick little spray over top of the connector to help against the elements. It kind of dispels water, stops any of the oxidation and corrosion. So a quick little spray, not a lot, just a quick, just like that. And what that does is it'll settle and it'll stay in place and provide a little bit of protection for that ground moving forward. So while the battery is out, we'll go ahead and install the positive side of that quick disconnect. And then we'll put that box back together. So underneath in the fuse panel, right here is we're going to be installing. This is actually the positive line coming into your fuse box area. So what we're going to be doing is mounting our quick release, the positive, right there. 13 millimeter. So what we're going to do is remove this nut, keep the main cables in place, make sure this is nice and clean, and then you're going to have the positive lead sit there as well for your battery maintainer. So the negative is in place on the chassis ground, and the positive is in place directly on the connector as it goes into the fuse panel. We'll put the cover for our fuse panel back on, just like that. And that's our disconnect. So I can tuck it in behind the battery or the fuse panel just like that when I'm not using it. So now what we need to do is just put this plastic back in place. Alright, so the new battery is in. We're just going to lock it down. And then we're going to connect our terminals. We want to make sure the terminals are nice and clean. Positive terminal goes in first. And again, you do this to reduce the risk of a short circuit on the battery while you're doing the install. Again, if I was to slip right now, if my grounding cable was connected to the battery and I slipped and hit something metal on the chassis, it would cause a short circuit. So, last but not least, again, make sure it's clean. And we've got juice. So, last thing you want to do is date your batteries so that you know when it went in. So I'll just grab a marker and do that. Well, alright, that concludes another video for Just Corvette Crazy. So in this episode, you learned the importance of maintaining your ground connectors to avoid those electrical gremlins in the Corvette. So I was replacing my battery. At the same time, I cleaned up and maintained that main ground connector, installed my quick disconnect for the battery maintainer, and now we're all set to take her for a run. So until next time, Mr. G says, keep the rubber side down, everybody. Take care.